welcome. Afternoon. Thank you for joining us. A few bits of housekeeping to start with. We will actually be recording this session. The recording has just started. So please do shout if you're not happy with that. Send us a message after, but the recording started. And what we will kindly ask, actually, we'll share the deck with you guys as well straight after the call. So if you're making notes or whatever, do not worry too much about that. We'll make sure that we send you all of these slides after the call later this afternoon. And I'm also going to kindly ask if you've got any questions, if you can add them to the chat or the Q&A functionality, that would be great. We are going to be pausing at various periods during the webinar today to take a look at some of the questions, and you'll see some of my colleagues might be able to help myself and Eddie take a look at some of those questions, and hopefully we'll be able to answer or discuss some of those. Today we are actually going to be discussing S&OP and hopefully debunking some of the myths that surround S&OP. To kick us off, I guess you could, myself and Eddie, Mythbusters. We're going to go on this theme a little bit today. All right. Let's just do a quick intro, Eddie. Do you want to start, actually?
Sure. So I've been working across supply chain for nearly 2 decades now. Since joining Argon, I've worked a lot in planning and inventory management, covering sort of the full range of supply chain processes from S&OP in various sectors.
Great. Thanks, Eddie. For those of you that don't know me, I'm Sam Maguire. I am, just like Eddie, a managing principal here at Argon and Co in the UK. I've been at Argon now for around 6 years or so. You'll usually find me managing some of our big transformation projects in planning and other places, and that includes S&OP, topic for today. And prior to that, I was in industry and planning, logistics, a few different roles there. But it's great to be here today. That's us. Just to get, well, we wanted to be actually very upfront with you guys. So these are the 5 myths that we are going to be looking at today. We could have chosen 10, 15, maybe more myths. So it seems like there's quite a few myths around S&OP. But these are the 5 we're going to be tackling, hopefully, today. But before we jump into each of these myths one by one, what we did want to do is just do a little bit of grounding with everyone, ground ourselves on what is S&OP. We won't spend too long on this. I know a lot of you guys are quite aware, but let's just bring ourselves all up to speed on S&OP very quickly. So S&OP is a process which really tries to align all functions across the business to drive powerful decision making. To us, it's distinct from strategic planning, as you can see here on this slide, and it's also distinct from operational planning, S&OE, financial planning, things like that. It kind of sits in that happy medium of wanting to drive feasible plans, wanting to drive aligned plans, wanting to kind of work in that middle horizon between strategy and operational, what we call that tactical layer, S&OP. As always, guys, this is a quick reminder. Any questions you've got, feel free to add, and we will come to those at various points. Expanding on this a little bit, we typically expect S&OP to sit in this kind of 3 to 24/36 month horizon. Prior to that, you get into kind of the scheduling kind of timeline or horizon, and after that is really what we call the strategic horizon, you know, when we go beyond that 24 or 36 months. I will caveat this by saying it does depend on industry. Obviously, this does vary quite a lot between different industries, but this is typically where we expect S&OP to play when it's, you know, optimizing demand, supply, improving utilization, all of those kind of decisions that S&OP traditionally helps to drive. I told you it'd be quick, just a couple of slides we had on kind of grounding what S&OP. And we're going to now, if possible, to what your experience, guys, is on S&OP. So I would encourage you all to please grab your phones, scan the QR code, go to menti.com, use the code on screen. It's only 2 questions, so I promise you it won't take us too long to hear your experience. I'll give you a minute just to jump on. It'd be interesting to see how you rate the effectiveness of your S&OP process today. We will, in a couple of slides' time, actually be looking a little bit at what we see in the market, but it'd be great before that to see what you guys see, how you perceive it. All right. So we've had close to 20 responses already. We're kind of spreading, a lot of you maybe sitting on the fence a little bit or medium, but we've got more low than high. That's maybe as we'd have expected, I think, and that follows our experience a little bit, but we'll get on to that shortly. Cool. Thank you very much. One more Menti question. What we would like to look at, and this is a free text one. What are some of the challenges that you face with your S&OP process today? Hopefully you'll see a couple of boxes. Feel free to add 1, 2, 3 comments on some of the challenges, and we'll have a quick look and see if there are any themes. Some of the challenges. Okay, so some of the challenges with S&OP process today. Thank you for all those that are responding. I'll let it settle for a minute and then highlight any themes that we're. Okay, so engagement, I think that's one of the central ones on this board. I'm just looking at my larger screen for what we've got. Lack of decision making, I'm seeing there. A couple on decision making, I think I would agree with that. We've got some stuff around IBP and maybe what the difference there between S&OP and IBP is. Data, commitment, transparency, a lot of themes actually across there, but it looks like we've got quite a few different challenges around S&OP today. So quite a lot to be worked on, quite a lot of opportunity. Cool. Okay, all your engagement. So we have actually at Argon and Co, we look at benchmarking. We have an independent benchmarking study that we run pretty regularly, and our data here, and just very quickly, I'll explain the diagram actually. We've got here, don't worry too much about the competency not achieved, competency, proficiency, mastery, the words exactly, kind of think of it as growing maturity. But really the important thing to call out here is what we see is 28% of current S&OP processes that we've looked at were rated not fit for purpose. That's quite a high number. And I think even more shockingly, 74% were rated below proficient. That means essentially below good. That's not mastery, that's below good. So I think these really stand out, that there's quite a few challenges, quite low maturity. That's really what we're seeing in the market, and that probably matches up quite well with some of the challenges that you guys are facing today. I did just want to touch on one case study quickly, actually, that kind of brings to life pretty typically what we see on an S&OP type project. This was a farmer, a large global farmer, client of ours, and we had a deep dive into their current S&OP process. And what we saw was a lot of time, a lot of manual time being spent preparing for S&OP meetings. And a lot of the time in these meetings actually was spent on inform or arguing over data and that type of thing, and not decision making, which we really like to see in high maturity S&Ps. So together with the client, we really drove these meetings to be decision focused, reducing the time spent prepping for and in them. And we also introduced things like dynamic dashboards to make information more real time, but also to reduce that prep time. And that's pretty typical of what we see out there. Great. Ollie, I'm going to throw over to you. Have we got any questions thus far from the team?
Hi, Sam. No, we don't have any questions so far. If anyone does have any questions, just pop them in the chat.
No questions suddenly coming in.
No questions.
No, that's fine. I'll be hopeful that we've got lots of questions on the next pause. So I challenge everyone on the call to please ask some questions. The trickier, the better. We like a challenge on a Tuesday afternoon. All right, you'll be pleased to hear I am going to hand over to my colleague Eddie now. He's going to take us through some of the first myths.
Sure. So we're going to go through and look at each of the myths in turn. So the first one is that everybody aligns to one number. So you'll see that there's lots of inputs that come together to really focus in and create one number, one plan. And that tends to be the most likely option that's circulated around for supply chain to execute against and to track and monitor sales against. But this does bring some problems. It does sound good, but it really doesn't recognize the variability that we see within the supply chain and within the market. And it misses out recognizing the different scenarios and potential risks and opportunities that might exist to show the variation around that plan. So maybe let's just take one example now to show some of the range of potential outcomes. So we could see that we might have an optimistic version of the plan, or an upside version, as it's often called, and that could be based upon winning a tender or not, or being successful in converting a customer. Or potentially we might have a more pessimistic or downside-based scenario where we might be seeing the risk of competitors cutting prices or actually losing a customer. So we really can present those different range of demand side scenarios into the supply chain. So looking in a bit more detail, the reality is that we all have a wide variety of scenarios, both imagining all the matrix complexities of both supply and demand side options within the S&OP process. And it's really important to recognize that we do have this uncertainty and feed that into the decision-making process and not ignore it and really assume that we're going to be successful at achieving the plan. So what we recommend is developing a range of inputs from the sales or demand side, and then testing those through the supply chain by using scenarios and what-if analysis to really understand what the range of responses might be and the capability of the supply chain to respond to those. And then discussing and engaging with the executive team through the S&OP process and really deciding and focusing in on together what is the most likely option, but with an understanding of the range of what might happen within the supply chain. So this may not be simple to achieve in terms of the sort of arranged forecast. So it's really important that we focus in on the people, process, and system elements to make this successful. So particularly as we've got a wide variety of risks and opportunities, it's important to have clear ownership around those. In terms of the process, we need the dynamic supply plan and processes really around collaboration to ensure that all actors within this extended process of focusing on sort of more of the probabilities and ranges within the supply chain is well managed. And then we also need to be supported by systems to make this process efficient. So the ability to run scenarios, what ifs, and simulations is really important to manage this efficiently, because anyone who's worked in Excel to complete scenarios, it's a very painful and long process. So including this as part of the S&OP process, we need an appropriate tools to be able to manage this. Thanks, Sam. So we've seen the S&OP process. We might align around one number, but we definitely have a view of the range of potential outcomes and understanding what that brings in terms of improving supply chain robustness within S&OP. Moving on to the next myth, thinking about, are each of the 5 steps of equal importance? So just looking back at what Sam showed earlier around a traditional 5-step process with new activity, demand, supply, reconciliation, and exec review, and really to try and understand and explore, do each of those steps really have the same focus and effort really in each of the different steps? So let's look at some different companies and industries. So for example, more of a product-led business, for example, in consumer electronics or fashion, they might have more of a focus on the new activity-based step, compared to perhaps more of a demand-led business with very much more focus on thinking about promotions and commercial activity within the demand step, or potentially more operationally based companies, potentially FMCG or grocery type companies, where really the focus is more around supply chain and the various steps in terms of managing a network of factories or outsourced contract providers into the supply chain. So let's take a look at what this might look like in practice with an example. So for a product-led business with greater speed of new launches and changes to the product portfolio, we might see additional feeder meetings and new activity steps, and potentially on the demand side, specific demand meetings about particular launches or D-lists within the business. So there is highly likely that more time and activity will be spent on step 1 than other steps within the process to really ensure that the churn of new products and new activities within the product portfolio is well managed, and how it impacts on all the other steps, be it in demand or supply. So we've seen through some examples there that not all steps might have equal importance within the S&OP process, really depending on your industry and business dynamics. So now we'll go on to look at, is S&OP always a fully monthly based process in terms of its cadence?
Sorry, Eddie, just quickly, we've just had a question come through just on the
Sure.
the last part. So from Michael, do you have any strategies that you've used that have helped in the move from one number to more of a risk and opportunity based forecast, especially in organizations that are commercially led and driven by budget and quarterly LE process?
Sure, a good question. So I guess tips on starting that risks and opportunities process is really to start focusing on assumptions and getting to have commercial and other people that are putting those in think about the probability of those in terms of managing potentially the pipeline of potential things we might include or exclude from the sales forecast and bring into the demand planning process. So I think that often sort of chimes in with the quarterly process where we might be challenging colleagues to try and achieve a particular number and to try and decide about what would be included within the demand forecast or not. So it's really that assumptions and probability based piece that I think is important to include. I don't know, Sam, if you want to build on that.
No, I think that's a fair example of what we see. I think what's quite important to note is when you begin to have more kind of range forecasts and more scenarios, we're really seeing that driven by new tools that we have. So some of the S&OP systems that we're seeing today really support not running, one or two scenarios that you can bring because each scenario takes many days to run, but you can run multiple scenarios. At lower levels of demand plan, you can have range forecast building assumptions on top of each other. And it can go quite deep, and we could probably do, a whole hour on probabilistic planning and some of that stuff. But focusing just on S&OP, I think some of the new tools that are coming and that are actually already out there really support ranged forecasts under S&OP. That's all I'd add, Eddie.
Thanks, Sam. I think there might be one other question. Is that right, Sophie?
Let me just double check. Yes, just one that's just come in now. So have you seen any examples of the range forecasting being automated with statistical forecasts or AI?
I'm happy to take this one. Yes, so range forecasting, I know I'm probably going to risk going too deep into probabilistic planning here, but we are beginning to see with some clients, with some companies, range forecasting being driven by statistics, being driven by demand sensing, being driven by other things, driving demand plans at a low level, which are then rolled up to a higher level for use within the S&OP process. So remembering the kind of horizons that we're looking at in S&OP, we do have range forecasts being driven, very automated from that kind of deep low level and being summarized up into S&OP. So I think it's being driven through, some of those new functionalities and new ways of demand planning that then enters the S&OP process. And then the only other thing I would call out is it's a bit similar to before, so stop me if I'm repeating myself, but what we are seeing is a plethora, the number of scenarios being considered being way more. And then that, whether you're running thousands of scenarios at times and then really using AI and some of the data analytics tools that are now out there to hone in on, right, which ones are we going to consider and bring to our meetings. So, we're not going to bring all 1,000 and discuss all 1,000, but what are the most likely scenarios, which are the biggest risk scenarios that we want to be talking about.
We just got a few more questions that have come through, Sam. I'm not sure if you want to do them now or during the pause.
I'm happy with either.
Okay. What's the typical accuracy for demand planning in industry? We have seen lots of optimism driving inventory challenges with low volumes. That's one question.
Okay, so demand planning accuracy. I would say there is no number. It really does vary based on what is good demand planning accuracy varies based on the industry. It can vary based on the supply chain setup that you've got. So giving a one number is not really possible, I would say. Here you have to look at what is the company, what's their setup, and then what are they currently achieving in some of those challenges. So you need to have demand planning accuracy measured correctly, and you need to be targeting it in terms of what is right for your supply chain. I would say though that you should also look at keep increasing demand planning accuracy. So it's not a still number of, we must have 80% forecast accuracy measured by MAPE 4 weeks out, blah, 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 at a SKU level. I'm making up some examples from the past that I've seen, but that is not applicable to all companies and to all industries. It depends what's required, and it depends where you currently are sitting for where you should be targeting demand planning accuracy. Anything to add to that, Eddie?
So I think we're seeing in some ways that's one metric, but it's also important to think about forecastability. I think just some products are inherently more complex to forecast than others, so that's an important metric to consider, as well as the forecast value add. So if we think about what you might be able to achieve through a simple statistic or naive forecast, and then in terms of all the intelligence overlays, uplifts, planner adjustments that we're making on top of that, are we really making an improvement to that? So I think it's a bit about accepting some of the reality and focusing in the effort from the demand planning and commercial activities, really about improving and adding value where it can be best placed in terms of efficiency and time, and sort of the criticality of those different products as well, in terms of the effort that you put in, depending on their impact on the overall supply chain and your financial performance.
Great point, Eddie. Can't agree enough. Forecast value add.
Okay, and we've just got another question as well. So why not assess risk and ops in an earlier step of the S&OP, then agree with the team what risks and opportunities we want to take into account, and then work to a single plan? Are there any disadvantages, or do you see any disadvantages in this way?
So I think that's partly what happens. You do discuss the risks and ops in the first step within the demand planning step before you share your demand plan to supply planning. But it's about, I think, conditioning the supply chain and putting in, I guess, no mitigations for potential outcomes from the demand plan. So I think it's much better that executives are aware about where in the supply chain there might be a capacity constraint, which machine or which line or which factory perhaps is more sensitive to the potential range of demand outcomes, rather than just hoping that you're going to achieve that single number. It's more about ensuring the supply chain is agile, and where you haven't put steps in place to manage a supply chain risk, that you've done that with full knowledge of the business.
Great. Thanks for all those questions so far, guys. We'll be having a few more pauses as we go through, so keep sending them in, please. That's appreciated.
So back to myth 3, focusing in on, is S&OP a monthly process with the same cadence really for each month? So what we'd like to just share really is around sort of looking at the financial calendar. So what we see is that not all S&OP cycles are the same, and that some businesses take this light full approach to dovetail with the monthly into quarterly financial planning process, sort of recognizing that on a quarterly basis, most companies have this latest financial estimate, which wraps in your actuals combined with your remaining period for the year. So it might be 3 + 9 or 6 + 6 or 9 + 3 in terms of what you've got left for the remainder of the year. So what we see is some companies take more of a holistic and intense process on that quarterly cycle, with running perhaps a more efficient, light, exception-based S&OP process on the intervening months. But that's just one, I guess, dynamic around the financial calendar, but we also see some industry-related dynamics as well. So just looking at perhaps some of the different industries, so we might see a more frequent S&OP process within fast fashion. Within technology and electronics, there might be more agile, ad hoc based S&OP process. The seasonal type products or focus companies will focus more on the peak. Highly automated companies that use a lot of AI might have a more continuous based process. And startups and smaller businesses based on resourcing might have more of an ad hoc or more of a 6-month annual type focus, alongside low variability industries, perhaps with businesses with a long outstanding order book, potentially in more of the capital area. They might focus more in a quarterly or even twice annual S&OP process, or that could be adapted based on sort of the market conditions changing if they had a period of cancellation of orders, for example. So we do see some variety within the different types of industries. So it's important that the S&OP process is tailored and appropriate to your business, and that we just don't apply perceived best practice as the sort of the 5 steps every month without really considering what is right for that individual business or business sector.
Okay, we do have a couple more questions that have come through. So what would you recommend changing to changing the commercial mindset to let your company use statistical forecasting rather than manual forecasting inputs as a way of influencing forecasting accuracy results?
Yeah, so I think there's kind of 2 things that are coming to my mind on this. One of them is maybe a can of worms. So I'll start with the slightly easier one first. I mean, most companies want their forecast to be as accurate as possible. And as Eddie mentioned before, we've got different ways to measure accuracy, but at the end of the day, you want your forecast to be accurate. We often, very often, find that statistical forecasting for most products, for most SKUs, or forecasting levels, drives greater forecast accuracy, which is great. And I think that's a key driver for businesses adopting statistical forecasting. Yes, there's also sometimes reduction in effort that goes into creating the forecast, but I think greater forecast accuracy is a really big driver. The other one that is the can of worms that I was mentioning a bit is around ownership of demand planning within businesses. We do see a split, as I'm sure some of you guys see in your own businesses, where in some companies demand planning sits under sales or marketing, and in other companies it sits under supply chain. Some would argue it doesn't matter where it sits, as long as it's being accurate. What at least I often find is that when it sits under supply chain, it does seem to drive accuracy a bit more. Maybe it's incentives of driving, not over forecasting, not under forecasting, not trying to back up stock, not undercooling sales plans. Those kind of things sometimes I think enter people's minds. And I'm not just saying this as a supply chain professional, but we do often quite find that when it sits under supply chain, it does seem to drive that real accuracy mindset. Anything to add, Eddie, from your side?
So I think as well, it's not a binary choice of either or. I'm always a fan of the sort of competitive tension between those two. So I still think it's important for commercial to create their view of the manual forecast. Obviously, we understand that perhaps is at more of a higher level, maybe at customer level or product family rather than individual ones. So, and then understanding how that gets paraded down. So you look sort of commercial one way, and then you can look statistical forecast up. And I think seeing the two approaches and being able to challenge and compare between really helps uncover some assumptions and perhaps where commercial can add extra value, but also providing that sort of base, very evidence based, data-driven approach to really enhance and support the forecast. So I think the two things can work well together, but I understand, I guess the purpose of the question is that companies that have always taken perhaps more of the manual approach might need some more education and engagement and sort of awareness around the use of the statistical forecast and how that really can augment the process and not really replace those commercial inputs.
Thanks both. We've just got another question. This one's quite an interesting one. So any tips on influencing each of the functions, so sales or operations, for example, to improve their own capabilities instead of blaming the other side for deviations?
So I can start if you want, Sam. So I think, I guess one of the first things is really about education about what the S&OP process is, because there is definitely collective decision making and collective agreement and alignment on the plan. So I think it's firstly about understanding the purpose of S&OP and what it is to be part of the S&OP team guiding and making decisions. I think also there should be an awareness about what the capability of the supply chain is and what the capability of the forecasting demand side is, and almost accept the reality of where we are today and work together to improve that, but not really expect every prediction to come out right, and a forecast is by definition a forecast. So I think there's some education and understanding needed around those areas as well.
Yeah, I think, Eddie, I'd agree with everything you said. S&OP is a collective of sales, marketing, finance, supply chain, driving to the same goal, all hopefully working together, and really trying to drive out blame culture would be key. Challenge is great, challenge is cool, but blame is not. So you should go, yes, you need to root cause afterwards where you had big deviations, how can we learn, etc. But it's not about the blame game. And I think sponsorship around that from executives and S&OP leads would also be great to see behavior wise, if that's something that a challenge that you're facing in your S&OP process today.
And I think just to add as well, it's important to think about your I guess speed of decision making and your ability to spot some of the leading indicators as well, to try and not maybe let some of those deviations pass an S&OP cycle. It's really important that that accurate information comes in quickly so that people can adapt and respond, and that responsiveness as well as considering some of the mitigations, what we talked about, the range forecast and understanding the impact, can help mitigate that and make it more feel like we're all working together to try and manage the uncertainty that all the departments are facing.
Thanks both. We've just got two more questions. So what's the best tool to share KPIs in the various S&OP forums rather than common PowerPoints? And then potentially we could link this to the next question, which is, please can you share some examples of how clients have successfully boosted engagement in the S&OP process?
Yeah, so I think you have for me to take the first one, Eddie. So I think I'm not a huge fan of great long PowerPoints in S&OP processes, especially when they are used in meetings rather than pre-read, and especially when lots of time and effort has taken place to convert numbers into PowerPoint presentations. So I think a great way to share KPIs in terms of low prep and real time is dashboards. So whichever dashboard solutions I think you have within your business, they can be a great tool to be able to show your S&OP, various meeting key KPIs. I would also just a quick one on KPIs, because we haven't got too much, we're not delving into KPIs too much today. So just a couple of comments on KPIs. I think it's important to look at your leading indicators, your output metrics, and your process metrics when it comes to S&OP as well. So look at how effective your S&OP process is being in terms of results and in terms of the effort going into it. That would be something that I would encourage as well. Eddie, over to you, maybe for either build on that one or to tackle the second one.
So I guess to say, like, probably what people will experience is you've got fragmented KPIs that, depending on the various different systems, could be your CRM, your forecasting, your supply planning system, your ERP. You've kind of got part of the picture there. So I think it's important to perhaps think about the wider business data strategy and business intelligence. And if you've got some data platform or a BI tool that's really able to automatically blend and get those different data sources together all in one place. Obviously, we've got the classic free Power BI type approach that we've worked on with clients before about creating some efficient dashboards that are really taking in those multi-sources from all the different systems to try and give that pre-prepared KPIs, meeting packs, and perhaps discussion points for each of the meetings within the S&OP cycle. So yeah, that was my comment on KPIs. Is it okay to move on to the engagement one now, Sam? So I think for me, you've got sort of two levels of engagement. You've got the senior S&OP team in terms of your sponsor and your exec team, and then you've got the people that might be contributing and providing information and insight into the process that might not actually be attending the meetings themselves. So I think it's really important to educate and level set all the meeting attendees and participants and the exec team about what good S&OP is. And I'm a big favor of sort of industrial tourism and seeing and sharing and experiencing what good looks like in other industries, and obviously depending on the competitiveness and the tensions with that, perhaps in some of your peer companies, to really understand. We see a lot of supply chain executives perhaps have got really deep experience within their own company, but maybe don't have that outward eyes. So I think it's really around educating and setting the goal and the vision for S&OP, showing people what sort of best practice and good looks like, and then providing tools that support them running the S&OP process effectively. Because if people feel if it's a waste of their time, if it's just information sharing and we never get to decisions, engagement will be low. But providing the right level of automation and efficiency in terms of the tools to make that process work is where I've seen that the engagement can be boosted.
Thanks, Eddie. And we've just got, I think, related to what you just said, so that ties in quite nicely with how we can manage to get clear outcomes and forecast validation when we have so many people involved in the process. Sam, Eddie, we've got two more questions. Would you like to take them now or later on?
We've got another pause coming up, so maybe if we're okay to hold on to those couple, and feel free to get them coming in because we have plenty of time later on, if that's all right.
Okay, so we've looked through about aligning to one number. Do all the steps have equal importance, and is an S&OP a monthly process? And now we're going to move on to discussing integrated business planning versus S&OP, and are they really inherently different? So our definition of integrated business planning is that it's an evolution of S&OP, really taking that more holistic, longer term view. So it really brings in more the commercial and financial planning, really thinking about profitability and turnover rather than just sales volumes. And brings in other departments and actors within the supply chain. And I mean, other business functions in terms of commercial, marketing, and finance. So if you look at the bottom, you'll see a chart looking at the effectiveness and maturity of various S&OP processes. So we would see a basic S&OP process just balancing supply and demand, and then moving on to more of a sustained S&OP process, with integrated business planning being a higher maturity level than that, bringing in sort of more the commercial and financial elements and having a longer horizon, linking more towards the strategic planning. And then in some slides later, you'll see about some of the future options, moving more towards continuous business planning and bringing sustainability into IBP as some examples there. So that really sort of helps to introduce integrated business planning. So in terms of S&OP and what the IBP element is in terms of adding in, it's definitely focused on value. It's more collaborative across the supply chain. It has different owners and is more owned outside supply chain, focused on the exec team. It includes different features around commercial alignment and finance, and includes risks and opportunities, and has a wider reach in terms of linking down into sales and operations execution in terms of more the near term, and then leading up to and linking into the long-term strategic planning, and thinking really about focusing more around the signals and insights from all over the business, bringing it together. So really that evolution from balancing supply and demand, am I going to hit my volume numbers, to really thinking about how we're going to achieve the business strategy in terms of key financials and key metrics, and being able to understand the implications of the choices that we make in S&OP on our critical KPIs, be they service or profitability, and help influence those choices through the decisions that we make. So that was the 4 myths, and I'll hand over to Sam for myth 5.
All right, thank you, Eddie. So we are 4 down, 1 to go in terms of our myths. So we probably all, as we've mentioned earlier in the Mentee, we probably all hear some complaints about our S&OP processes. I mean, here's a few that I've heard in the past or similar. Execs override us. We spend so much time prepping and have no time to execute in the month. We lack sponsorship. People aren't trained. We have turnover of staff in S&OP. The cross-functional engagement isn't really there with certain parts of the business, or we're just lacking decision making. These are some of the common kind of gripes that you hear. I think some of these are symptoms of an ineffective and poorly adopted S&OP process, or a lot of them are. Some of them I think have relatively easy fixes. Some of this is training, some of this is driving behaviors from leadership in the right way. I think others of these are maybe a little bit trickier to tackle, not quite so easy, and some of them might even be myths that hopefully we started to tackle or bust in Mythbusters terms today. I guess the question to me that brings all this up is, if there's all these gripes, if there's all these complaints about S&OP, should we just give up on it? It's now the time to throw in the towel, wave the flag. I think you know where I'm going with this, but the answer, from ourselves is strictly no. It feels like supply chain shocks are increasing, or at least not decreasing in severity and frequency, whether this is conflicts, whether this is climate change, whether it's pandemic, inflation that we've seen. We can call out loads from the last 5 to 10 years. So these shocks are, sometimes supply side driven, sometimes demand driven, but there are a lot of these supply chain shocks and shocks that affect the business. And we still need, and maybe even more than ever, a structured process to bring functions together across the business to discuss and address these challenges in a timely, value-adding basis. And what is this structured process, right? And to me, it's S&OP still, right? Whatever you call it, whether it's IBP, S&OP, S&OP plus, whatever you want to call it, marketing-wise, S&OP to me is that process that allows us to address these challenges and make these business-critical decisions. To me, it's really about effective S&OP. That's what we are striving for. That's what, and I think you'll see from the previous slide, right, that this is more important than ever. So what can you do? You can simplify process. You can keep things at the right level for decision making. Don't go too deep. You can use automation. You can collaborate cross-functionally, so you don't have multiple competing processes of business decision making crossing over with each other. You can be timely with your data, with your decision making. And really, why are we doing all this? Well, it's to add value, right? And make your supply chain and your business more resilient. One other little thing I did want to mention here was maturity, effectiveness of S&OP in any of its guises will continue to be a moving target. I think coming back to a slide a little bit that Eddie was showing earlier, the maturity curve is continuing to go up, and things won't stand still. What's rated as ranked as mature today will not be in 5 years' time. And this is continuous improvement, right? Something that we love, probably all of us, continuous improvement. So I hope that kind of demonstrates, at least in our opinion, why S&OP's relevance is not fading. It's actually more critical than ever. And really, we need to strive for value-adding, effective S&OP. I'm going to change track a little bit now and kind of use a few minutes to look at what the future may hold for S&OP. I do not have a crystal ball. I don't know exactly where we will be going in S&OP over the next 5+ years, but we've called out 3 areas which we are already beginning to see actually in the marketplace, and you guys might be beginning to see this too, the future trends and direction, and those are the ones that I would bet the most money on if I were a betting man, which I'm not. So the first one is around artificial intelligence. I'm sure you guys hear a lot about artificial intelligence affecting many aspects of our lives, and I believe S&OP will be no different. Typically today in businesses, right, you see a lot of time spent querying data, reviewing the past, etc. That's definitely not best practice, even today. In the future, we're going to be decision driven, hopefully not spending much time on querying data, reviewing the past, etc., but really thinking about the future. I think AI will really help us in a number of ways, one of them being in some of the prep for the S&OP activities, whether that's preparing, some companies preparing slide packs using artificial intelligence, or whether it's following up with actions. And I think as well, when it comes to decision making, there will also be AI and ML to support with that. We're already beginning to see that decisions below a certain threshold are being driven by AI or machine learning, not driven by human input anymore below a certain threshold. So that kind of human machine interaction is already coming together. And the other one kind of example that I've seen out there is generative AI. So this is free text being able to type to an interface where you can call out information and you can actually adjust plans on the fly. So I've seen in an S&OP meeting, someone in the meeting being able to type, show me the sales forecast for this over the next 3 years compared to the past 2 years, and that is brought up within a matter of seconds. And then even I've seen in companies, people being able to adjust plans by typing what they want to the plan to change by in natural language. So it's a different interface and a faster interface to that type of interaction. The second piece that I want to talk about when we look to the future is visibility. I'm going to build this in 3 layers, really. So I think there's a need for what I would call a stable foundation to enable this. So advanced ERP systems, APS, data lakes, all those types of things, have those in place that will then enable some of the later steps. So then we have what I would call actually gaining the visibility stage. So this is gaining visibility within your own business. So that might be a supply chain digital twin. And it's also about gaining visibility up and down, so upstream and downstream. So that's through supplier integration, whether that's through IoT, whether that's through some of the other kind of tools or sensors that we can get from upstream and downstream. And then I think the third piece to layer on top is, great, we have this visibility, we have this digitally enabled foundation, but what are we going to actually do with it? Right, what decisions are going to be made off the back of it that are better than before, either more timely or more accurate? And that, I think, links back to some of the augmented decision making that we expect and that we're beginning to see already. In fact, based upon this greater visibility, we're getting even better decision making. I think all of this will drive, better decision making and also greater, not just supply chain, but business resilience. When you look at the speed and the type of decisions that are being made, they really do help to drive that. The third one I just wanted to pick up on today was about sustainability. This was teased a little bit by Eddie earlier when he showed you that graph of what the future might hold. And we are at the early stages of seeing this, but I think it is critical. It's emerging, it's necessary for us to bring sustainability into the S&OP fold. For a few reasons, but for example, more effective forecasting within S&OP allows you to reduce wastage, right? Reduce overage wastage that supports your sustainability goals, reduce unnecessary transport emissions if you're flying things in because you are often getting your forecast wrong or making an infeasible plan. So that's I think one piece. Then you've got bringing visibility of your sustainability impacts to leadership and to the S&OP process really allows you to maximize the effectiveness of initiatives such as sustainable sourcing, lean manufacturing principles, etc. We've begun to see this actually already. So as an example, we've got a client that is already looking at CO2 emissions at a very detailed level, but then those are being wrapped up and brought as an indicator for scenario planning within S&OP. So you're not just looking anymore at volume impacts of scenarios and capacity impacts, you're looking also at revenue impacts, you're looking at profitability impacts, and now the new thing here is in this example CO2 impacts. So you can see what is the impact of a certain scenario, or what is the expected CO2 impact of the latest S&OP plan and the different ranges within that. This is already being done by some companies, and I believe almost everyone is going to be doing this over the next 5-10 years, right? It's necessary, it will be required for reporting reasons, etc. That's a really big trend and emergence that we're seeing, bringing sustainability into the fold of S&OP or IBP. we will be getting to a Q&A again in a moment, but hopefully we have provided some insight into some of the common or S&OP myths, and hopefully some of these key takeaways on the screen kind of connect with you. So whether that's one size doesn't fit or S&OP connect with you, and hopefully we have provided some challenge or insight into your own challenges that you have under S&OP. And on that kind of thread of thought, I love a call to action. What are we going to kind of take away from this last hour or so that we've been spending together? And what my ask to all of you would be to challenge your own myths that may exist within your business, within parts of your business. Maybe it's one of the myths we discussed today. Maybe it's a different myth or preconception that exists that's holding back the effectiveness of your S&OP. Challenge yourself to think about that and think about how you will address this, begin to address this. We can all be enablers of change within our businesses. So how will we try and tackle some of these myths or preconceptions that are holding back the effectiveness of our S&OP process today? Great. I will do a final wrap up at the end very quickly, but why don't we get back to some of our questions that have hopefully been building up.
Yeah, we definitely have a few that have built up. So the first one, so as you previously mentioned, S&OP revolves around aligning plans for the mid to long-term horizon. So as we advance, anticipate and address the challenges, the need obviously for firefighting diminishes, leading to a decrease in the level and frequency of decisions. So the question is, how can we effectively communicate to the company that this reduction in firefighting is a positive outcome, indicative of a successful S&OP process?
So I think I understand like the sentiment behind the question, that firefighting can be seen as to be sort of a hero and you fix the problem. So I can understand the need to change that narrative. And one of the purposes, I think, around S&OP is to improve the robustness of the supply chain as well as the responsiveness. So I think one of the key elements is to create some metrics which manage and measure the actions you've taken to put in place mitigations, but also your ability to respond quickly to events, either a demand uptick or downtick. We've all seen examples where we've set safety stock based on static numbers and haven't changed it quickly enough, for example, or that we've taken a long time to respond to a new customer need. So I think including some metrics around responsiveness and focusing on how we've managed and conditioned the supply chain to respond to that range of outcomes we showed in the range forecasting piece can really help change and, I guess, reward people appropriately for doing the right thing and putting in a supply chain that can really meet the business needs and isn't just focused on perhaps even causing some of those firefighting issues by only considering one potential outcome.
I just add to that, Eddie, a little bit on, I find when there's a lot of firefighting in S&OP, it's often, in my experience, down to one of two things. Either the horizon of S&OP isn't quite right. You know, we're coming back to an earlier slide, we were talking about the horizon of S&OP being the 3 to 24, kind of 36 months. It depends on the industry, but often when it's starting at month 0 or 1, then we often see more firefighting.
True.
The second one, kind of root cause I see, is linked to it, but a poorly performing S&OE process. So S&OP is not a replacement for sales and operations execution. So you may well need a process for dealing with the 0 to 3 month horizon or 0 to 2 month horizon. We often see that. That's for the firefighting. That's a different process that may feed into, yes, the S&OP, but they are distinct processes that are there to tackle different challenges and make different decisions within the business.
Thanks both. The next question is, how can we keep a good track of the decisions that S&OP requires? Any tips?
So I think partly is in terms of the decisions that should be made. I think that's about meeting preparation and your structure and how you organize each of the individual steps to really focus in on highlighting as part of the pre-read and the information that's available to people before about what decisions should be made, and then really clearly documenting those and ensuring that those changes are made in either the demand plan or the supply plan and cascaded throughout the business. But some companies take sort of like a workflow type approach to ensuring those decisions are actioned and really influence either what's happening for the supply planner or the demand planner, or that influence appropriately the creation of the next cycle's set of information based on the guidance or potential scenarios that might be focused upon. Sam, I don't know if you want to add to that.
Yeah, I would agree with what you said. The other thing that I would call out is a tip that I've seen in the past for capturing assumptions, decisions made, etc. during an S&OP processes. Sometimes these are captured within S&OP dashboards or the S&OP tool that might support your S&OP process. So often we find that there's functionality to do that, and it's used, and it can be quite effective because you can, you know, in your next S&OP meeting, look back very easily at the decisions made in the previous one, what assumptions were made, are those assumptions still fair, etc. So yeah, capturing them in dashboards or the specific S&OP supporting tool can be quite useful as well. They're the higher level assumptions and decisions, right? It's not the deepest level.
Thanks, Sam. This next one is linked to what you were talking about regarding the supply chain shocks. So sometimes these business shocks require short-term operational decisions. Are we suggesting here that S&OP engage in this short-term operational activity, or just plans based on the shocks?
So my initial response is, if this shock is just going to be affecting you in that very short term kind of next 2-month horizon, it's not particularly for S&OP to get involved in. If that's all it's affecting, that's with the S&OE process of a business. If it's affecting, you know, the next 12 months, then there's a role to play for S&OE and there's a role to play for S&OP. So as a risk or as a change in the forecast or the supply capacity, etc., that will enter the S&OP process for the relevant horizon.
Yeah, I think that's right, Sam. I think probably just to build on that though, I think it can be about whether the issue's fixed, but it can also be potentially that you've gone below safety stock or the issue hasn't fully resolved and you've got fully back to where you intended to be. So you might have mitigated the initial problem, but some of those consequences might propagate on further. And I think it's also a chance as well to think about some of the assumptions and potential mitigations into the future as well. But I agree that if you fix the problem and you're back to where you should be in the SOE period, then there isn't really a need for S&OP to talk about that issue.
Great.
Okay, thank you. One last comment. So understand why you would want to spend less time reviewing the past, but if you don't look back, how do you learn and grow? So rather than spending less time reviewing the past, is the key just to ensure that looking back is informing decisions and actually adding value?
Yeah, no, good question. So I think to me, I think some of those numbers and what we were talking earlier were specifically on the meeting itself. So I'm all about looking at the past, learning from the past. That will drive a lot of assumptions about the future. I'm not saying the past always equals the future, that we definitely can't ignore the past. But really what I'm talking about driving decision making is in the forums themselves. We want to drive decision making rather than looking at the past. I would encourage people to look at the past more prior, you know, whether that's in prep or as feed into some of the statistical forecasting or other kind of ways that we build up the plan. But try not to spend the meeting itself looking too much into the past. Focus the meeting itself on decision making. That's kind of my message.
I think that's right, Sam. I think we've all seen that there can be a danger that S&OP meetings can become a bit of an informed. So you review past performance, then you get into explaining the gaps to each of your metrics that happened last month. And before you know it, you've burnt quite a lot of the valuable exec time in analyzing the past and potentially creating little hotspots of chance for blame and finger pointing about the past, which is something that's gone. I do understand just like you, Sam, the sentiment in terms about continuous improvement and learning. But I think focusing the S&OP meeting on that decision making is really important to ensure it's efficient and value adding.
Great. Thanks, Sophie, and thank you everyone for your questions. We've got about 1 or 2 minutes left, so let me just wrap up here. I just want to, both myself and Eddie, just want to thank you very much for spending, you know, an hour or so of your time over lunch today, joining us for this webinar. We really appreciate all your engagement, all your questions. Thank you. Feel free to reach out to us if there's any questions. Obviously, we'll reach out to you later today. We'll send you the slides. And I just want to thank you all again for joining. Eddie, anything else to add?
No, it's been great engagement, and yeah, echo Sam's comments. Thank you. It's been good to share some of our perspective on S&OP with you.
Great. Thank you all. Wish you all a great afternoon.
Thank you, Sam. Thanks, Eddie.
Thank you. Bye-bye.